I am here with author, illustrator, historian, musician, fencer, and reenactor, Don Hollway. It's a kind of a recap interview. I think you were the first person I ever interviewed on this YouTube channel,
Wow, I'm
so now
flattered.
we now we get to have like a year plus ago,
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
quite a while ago.
Because this book we're going to talk about, I hadn't even completed yet when we talked the last time. I think I was like two-thirds of the way through it or something. And
Yeah,
yeah, it's got to be at least a year and a half, I think.
yeah. So you had at the time written The Last Viking
Yep.
and Battle for the Island Kingdom.
Yes.
And this is the new one, Hammer of the Gods,
Yeah.
about coming May
May
2026.
May 7th, right.
May 7th
Right.
from Osprey. So like this, they're all like Viking, it's of your
It's
Viking Age trilogy
it's my Viking
right here.
trilogy. I didn't start out planning it, but that's the way it's ended up.
So this is Hammer of the Gods, King Olaf's Viking conquest. To start us off, like who was Olaf Tryggvason and why was he significant?
Well, his big claim to fame is to be the Viking king who made Norway a Christian country. And he didn't do it always peacefully, but he's the one who basically did it. And after he was gone, it fell apart again and had to be reconstructed by another Olaf, Olaf II, Olaf Haraldsson. But it was really Olaf Tryggvason who laid the groundwork. I mean, it was pagan when he got there, and he more or less forced Christianity onto it. So that's his major claim to fame. But in his time, he was a slave. He was a slave owner. He was a world traveler in medieval terms. He was a sort of adoptive English prince. Just had a very varied lifestyle compared to most Vikings. I mean, just most of them were farmers most of the year. He was not.
You really got around.
Yeah, right.
I'm very excited for this, but something that comes up a lot I've noticed on my channel is can you define Viking and the Viking Age for those of us who are unfamiliar with that?
Sure. Well, first of all, Viking, we use it as a noun now, but back then it was a verb. You weren't a Viking, you went Viking. And that's the major difference. But you see them coming out of the Dark Ages of Europe. I think it was like 795 AD when they make their first appearance at Lindisfarne Abbey on the Northumbrian coast. It was a secluded little island monastery up there that was attacked, and this is recorded in the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. And that's the first Viking attack in England. That's 795. It goes up until the Vikings keep getting stronger, stronger, stronger. Eventually, they take over half of England. It's called the Danelaw, and you have all the Danes and Norwegians up sort of in the north and northeast, and the English, the Anglo-Saxons all crowded down in the southwest until Alfred the Great got the Anglo-Saxon tribes all together and said, we're the English. The English had all been fighting among themselves, and that's how the Vikings defeated them. It was Alfred who said we have to get them together and take on the Vikings as one, and they did. And I think they pushed off the last Viking king was Eric Bloodaxe. I think they pushed him off in like the 950s. So it's 150 years, something like that the Vikings were there. Then you have a sort of lull for a couple of that's what Western historians call the first Viking Age. You have a sort of lull where the Vikings were basically all fighting among themselves, and they didn't mount any major invasions of England again until about the 990s, and that's Olaf Tryggvason's time, and he's the one who really got the first big raids organized. You saw some little chicken thieving raids that the Vikings were putting on, but he's the one who marshaled a huge fleet of like 100 ships and ended up at the Battle of Malden, which we'll probably get to later on here in the interview.
I'm just reminded that Leaves' Eyes, the heavy metal band, has a song called Battle of Maldon. So
I'm going to have to look that up.
That just clicked. But and then we have the end of the Viking Age. About when is that? Do we see
Right.
that
I talked about the first Viking Age when Olaf came back with his fleet of 100 ships. That's what they called the beginning of the second Viking Age. And you see that go the whole way up where you get Fine Forkbeard and his son Canute the Great, and they take over England. They actually took it over. And
cover it in this book.
I did. So England, for several years, decades, was a Viking kingdom. It wasn't until, well, read the book, there was some chicanery. It ended up back with the Anglo-Saxons. And the end of the Viking Age is in 1066 when Harald Hardrada, the last Viking.
The last Viking.
We didn't cue this stuff. This is all happening. This is organic here. Harald Hardrada shows up at the Battle of Stamford Bridge and is killed in 1066, and that is taken as the end of the Viking Age.
Yeah, everyone always forgets Canute and Spain.
Right.
It's like every time I will mention like the Vikings conquered England, and they're like, "You mean the Normans?" I'm like, "This is Spain Forkbeard erasure."
Yeah. And he actually appears. He was like a protege of Olaf Tryggvason. Olaf was working with him during the invasions because Svein was Danish, Olaf was Norwegian. And they got together, whereas a lot of the times the Norwegians and the Danes had been fighting and would go back to fighting in the years after this. But they got together temporarily when Olaf was putting together his huge fleet because there was money to be made, and they worked together to get that. So there's a direct connection from Olaf Tryggvason to Svein Forkbeard to Canute the Great to the Anglo-Saxons and Harald Hardrada. There's a sort of chain of continuity there.
I think the level of infighting and creation of allies and then going back to infighting, like it's really easy to get simplified in these overarching conversations.
I don't know how anybody in that age trusted anybody else. I mean, they would make a deal and break it just whenever it was convenient. I just,
it's how much was honor really that important?
That's true. That's a good point. You had honor as long as it was useful to you.
As long as it's convenient.
Right.
So how was the Viking conversion to Christianity different from the Christianization? That's a hard word. Of like the Americas or other regions under colonialism. So we have like in the New World. So like in the early modern period.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Well, the big difference is that what happened with the Vikings wasn't really colonization in the sense that you saw Spain and Mexico and South America, those were colonies, and the French and the English in North America, same thing. Those were colonies that they were basically forcing people to become Christian, just more or less declared that you are going to become and didn't give them any choice. With Scandinavia, it's hard to explain. They weren't colonies, and it wasn't often done by choice, but it wasn't the same thing as a foreign invader coming in and taking over. Denmark became Christian because the Holy Roman Empire, or Emperor Otto, more or less said to Harold Bluetooth, "I defeated you in battle. You are going to be Christian now." And because Bluetooth became Christian, Denmark became Christian. A lot of the people didn't necessarily agree, but they were Christian. And in Norway, they were all pagans, and you saw Olaf Tryggvason come back there when after all his adventures and his travels in England, came back there and again forcefully a lot of the time converted the people, but it wasn't a thing of colonization. It was more or less convincing them by force, if you want to say that. And a lot of them did come over willingly, because you have to look, I think we talked about this in our last interview, probably because I was working on this book at the same time and was coming to that realization in the research. A lot of the Vikings looked at Christ or the Christian God as a more powerful God than theirs, because if you look at in Russia, the Byzantine Empire had repulsed Viking attacks there. The Holy Roman Empire had repulsed Viking attacks. England had thrown the Vikings out. So the Vikings are looking around and saying, Odin and Thor really aren't matching up to the Christian God. And for them, the Christian God was a god of war. I mean, they were being defeated on every front. And it wasn't a big deal for them to, say, this is the more powerful God, and I think I'm going to worship him. Particularly once it was so easy to switch over, all you had to do was be baptized, and bang, you're a Christian, and good to go.
Like, I got to get me some of that. It's like, whatever they're doing, I got to get that.
Right.
So this is another thing that comes up a lot when we discuss like these historical warlord, powerful figures in history. Is how important or unimportant is it for us to understand the motivation of Tryggvason or leaders like him when we're discussing their lives and impact? So like an example is like, how sincere was the conversion to Christianity, or was it just a way to get power? Like, does that matter?
I think it does. You have to be aware that his life story basically comes to us. Actually, the life stories of most of these Vikings weren't written down at the time. Olaf's story wasn't really, he had a court skald, a poet, who recorded some of his stuff in just short, unless some of it's been lost. What survives is just short little snippets of poetry and everything, and it's all in that Viking style, which is so arcane that you really have to know what they're talking about to know what they're talking about. I mean, it's really hard to get through it. So after these bits of poetry were passed down, I think it was not until 200 years later that these Icelandic monks took all these stories together and started putting them down. One of them wrote in Latin, another one wrote in Old Norse, but these were Christian monks looking at what had been a pagan king. They are all interpreting this story and, quite frankly, propagandizing this story to make Olaf seem like more of a Christian hero than he may have actually been. I mean, and there's no real way to know. If you look at some of the Danish accounts, when he was fighting the Danes and the Germans over in Poland and that area, they didn't have such a high opinion of him. So it all depends on which lens you're looking at him. And what his motivations are all comes to us through that filter. So you have to sort of take that into consideration, and also take that into consideration if you're going to judge him for what he did.
So this next question kind of ties into the whole judging question.
Right.
But how true or false is it that we should judge historical figures based on the morals of their day? Because like some of the stuff he did might have been cool at the time, less so now.
Cool or cruel?
Either. Could be either.
Both. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Probably more. The people would have been probably more. Like, there's probably more things offensive to our sensibilities now.
Right.
But,
Absolutely. Yeah.
But like, is there a way that as a historian you balance that, or that you think that people should balance that when studying history? Or
I think you have to be remote enough from the subject to separate it. I mean, you can see what he did and not judge it yet. Understand why he did it in terms of the morals and values of his own time. And, in those terms, was he a great man? Was he a victorious king? Did he found a dynasty? Set that to the side. And then at the same time, after that, then you can judge by moral standards and say, he was a great man, but he was a total tyrant and whatever else. I mean, you have to be able to, was it George Orwell said, who was it that said about having two opposing thoughts in your mind at the same time? I think it was Orwell. That's what you have to do when you look at these guys. I mean, they are total tyrants and murderers in our terms, and we can accept that today. But back then, I think a lot of people admired what these guys did. They were great kings.
I was reading about like the strength of a king is considered part of his morality in this time period.
Right.
And so it's something I try to keep in mind when I'm reading about some of
them. These were violent times, and you had to be a violent man just to survive, let alone thrive and rise to kingship. I mean, there was no two ways about it. If you went back there and adhered to our moral standards back there, you would be laughed at and then killed. So, I mean, you have to keep that in mind.
So much of our modern morality is enabled by our society's stability.
Right. We have that luxury. We have that luxury to have the morals that we have today. They did not have that luxury. They were in a kill or be killed world a lot of the time.
Like one step from starvation at all times.
Right.
I've looked into this a little bit, but I'm curious on how did the rise of kings in Scandinavia affect the end of the Viking Age, specifically with like the raiding culture?
Right. When you saw the beginning of the Viking Age, I talked about Lindisfarne. That was just a lightning raid. There was nobody really in charge of it. Most of these guys were farmers most of the year, cattle traders, just low-level guys. And once or twice a year, it's like, oh, I'm running out of gold or silver. let's all hop in our dragon ships and go find some. And you see a lot of more sporadic raids in that early part. And then as time goes on, they start getting more organized and bringing in more men, and they're attacking places like Paris and, raising their game. Now, all of Southern Europe has already developed to that point where they're kings, they have kings, and they're a little bit more socially advanced than the northern barbarians. But the barbarians pick that up from the southern people. I mean, you have Charlemagne before this period. He's already founded the Holy Roman Empire. The Byzantines have been over there for hundreds of years. And the Vikings start looking at this, like we talked about the Christian God, saying, this is a better way than us in our mud huts for most of the year until we hop on our ships. So I think there was a civilizing effect on the Vikings, and that's where you see more kings Norway was like completely disunited. It was just a series of petty kings and they were all squabbling. But that set this up, that there would be one king and he would say, I'm going to conquer the rest of it. We're going to set up a nation here, or a nation state. I don't know what they would have called it. A kingdom. That's what they would have called it. I'm going to set up a kingdom. We're going to eliminate these other guys. And we're going to try to compete with these people down in the south. So it wasn't that the rise of kings ended the Viking Age. I think it was more like the Viking Age had rubbed up against the great empires to the south and sort of wanted to achieve or attain that same goal. And that sort of required kings to make that happen. So I think the kings are more of a reflection of the end of the Viking Age, not a cause of it.
That is a fascinating way of looking at it. I do like that. One thing I have noticed in studying the Vikings is that they were very pragmatic. Like they see something that that was working for someone else, and they're like, well, why don't we do that? Why don't we try that?
Yeah.
And it's very adaptable in a lot of ways.
You had to be when you were living up there. I mean, this is the medieval warm period, but I mean, it's still hard scrabble living. And if you see a better way, you take it. I mean, you don't want to stay up there living in your stone huts and everything for the rest of time.
It's like Scandinavia is like on the very edge of subsistence,
right?
Where you can live without modern technology.
Yeah, I talk about it in the book. I mean, people, you see them on TV and they're living in these huge great halls and multiple stories and everything like that. For the vast majority of Vikings, it was not that way. I mean, you were jammed into a hut with a dirt floor, and your animals were in the next room, and the water is bad, the food is not all that great. It was just hard scrabble living, constant disease, early death. You don't see that or at least I don't see it in most of these Viking shows.
I'm going to have to look into average lifespan because I've been finding conflicting information about that.
Yeah. Well, I think you would see a lot of the famous guys lived out a longer life because they had power, they had better nutrition, probably had men to do their fighting for them. But for the average person, lifespans were very short. I mean, just to even make it to young adulthood was a major accomplishment. I think half of them died off before that. You see a lot of these, you look at the Viking shows and the heroes are all in their 20s, late 20s, early 30s, something like that. These guys in the sagas, a lot of them were kids. Olaf Tryggvason killed his first man when he was 9 years old with an axe. I mean, these guys were young when they started this. You're thrust out into the world and there you go. Make it happen while you have the time.
I was reading about how the Anglo-Saxons considered 10 years old to be a man who could go to battle.
Right. And the girls were all married extremely young and yeah, extremely young. I think I touch on in the book. I have to wonder how that affected their mindset as well because, here you are, you're 13, maybe something like that, and the people who are twice your age are already dying off, and that you probably don't have that many years to go either. And that's just got to be a weight on your shoulders. Besides messing with the family structure, I read that even in our colonial times, a lot of people would grow up, one parent would die, the living parent would remarry, the living parent would die, and all of a sudden you're living with two people as parents who really aren't, and just as a function of short lifespans. And I have to wonder how much that affected their whole mindset back in those days. And I think that had a lot to do with their impulse to go grab life while you could because you don't have that much more of it, so make it happen.
There's this constant awareness of imminent death that
Right.
can happen at any time.
Right. And even if it isn't by chance in a raid, your lifespan isn't that far out in front of you yet.
It's like bad water. It's like you
Right.
could get a little cut that gets
Right.
infected. It's like so many things can happen. You can
Right.
die at any time.
Yeah. I just think that had to be an incredible weight on their minds. I mean, I don't think they would sit in their huts, fretting about it. I think they made the most of the time that they had, right?
It's like, maybe I don't have a reason to have this much anxiety, but it's
Right.
like, we kind of touched on this topic, but what do you think is most people's, like the average person's biggest misunderstanding about the Viking Age?
Well, sort of that. I mean, the short lifespans and the filthy conditions. The Vikings on the TV shows are all so clean and pretty, and
Have makeup too.
Right. Our Vikings were missing most of their teeth. They had, old battle wounds and, like you said, an infection that never really healed. And it was just a lot dirtier time. And yeah, Hollywood does not translate that very well, I don't think.
No, it's not good for cinema.
Right. Right. Not photogenic.
They have like the beautiful hair that has definitely never known malnutrition, and
Yeah. Well, they do say that the Vikings, I think I touched on that in the Battle for the Island Kingdom, how the Anglo-Saxons resented the Viking men because they actually did have better personal hygiene than the Anglo-Saxons at the time. The Anglo-Saxons resented them because they were stealing the English women. They didn't have to attack and rape them. They just took a bath every week and kept their hair combed and everything. And the English women were naturally attracted to them. So they do have that in their favor.
It's like there's a lot of young guys who are like that now. They're like, you want me to bathe, but just like, so what is something from the Viking Age that you have never seen depicted in media that you would like to see?
What I think, and they sort of do touch on this in TV, but the Vikings they weren't the first ones, but they formed like a global economy in the time period. I mean, when you have Vikings going down to Byzantium and then you find silver Byzantine coins in graves in Scandinavia, I mean, these guys had sent out trading channels or avenues all over the known world at the time. And you see in the shows the Vikings going to these places because they're way cool and they look nice and everything like that. But I don't think they really demonstrate how much that changed Northern European culture. A lot of the Viking raids were formed. That one of the reasons they think that the second Viking Age occurred in England was because the silver mines over in the Middle East dried up, and this all of a sudden choked the supply of silver. And there was a new mine in the Holy Roman Empire, but it was way down in the empire and impossible for the Vikings to reach. So the Vikings turned back to England and started up the second Viking Age because England had plenty of silver. And because it's too arcane and too complicated, you don't see that talked about on TV. I don't think there was any discussion in Vikings about, Middle Eastern silver is dried up, we're going to have to start going west again. There's none of that economic stuff going on.
We don't get to have the economic discussions.
Right. A little too dry for Vikings.
They made it all the way down to, they went into Spain too.
Right.
Where is it? I can't remember. I'm drawing a blank on which Middle Eastern country it was that they got into. I want to say Baghdad. I want to say they made it to Baghdad, but I don't remember.
Well, I think that they did sign up as mercenary fighters, even in the Muslim countries, because, one pagan, didn't make that much. They went where whoever was willing to pay them. So I don't think you saw too many Viking kingdoms in the Middle East. But if you want to look at the Normans, who were the descendants of Vikings, they went to Sicily and took that over, and they had a kingdom there that I don't want to quote the number, basically 1,000 years, I think. 800 years, I guess, till Napoleon came along and overthrew it. So, I mean, they did have global influence. Global is defined by Middle East to Spain.
800 years isn't a bad run.
Most countries would love to have that.
So I worded this question as what's your greatest challenge as a historian researching the Viking Age? But I know that there's quite a few. So what are some of them?
Besides, as we talked about, trying to balance the moral issues that are raised by what they're doing and whether it's right or wrong. And I try not to judge them at all. I leave the judgment up to the readers. I say this is what they did. You can judge them however you want to judge them on that. But another big thing is just trying to reconcile all the sources. As I say, with Olaf's saga, it was first written down by his contemporaries who were there when he was there. Wasn't consolidated into a long form until 200 years after he was dead. And then there were a couple versions that were written down, and I think the last one was written in like 1300, something like that. And by that time, it's almost taken on such a legendary status as a saga that it's got elements of fantasy in it. I mean, there's scenes where Olaf is talking to Thor and talking to Odin, and I put that in the story because it's part of the saga. I mean, people are going to say that's, obvious fiction, but it's part of the story, so you put it in. But you try to reconcile all that. It's even a gray area on what year he was born. There's like a 10-year span of what day he could have been born. And one of the original guys in Iceland took a look at all of it and sort of backtracked from the date that he took over Norway, which was 995, and backtracked through the events of his life and arrived at 963. And that's where I started from. But the same guy had some of his dates of the events of battles messed up. He has Olaf taking part in the Battle of the Danevirke, which was between the Holy Roman Empire and the Danes. And Olaf, I think, was like 9 years old when that happened and wasn't even in the area. He was living over in Russia. But because the story needed it, this guy has Olaf coming in and fighting there. And there was a couple instances of that where you have to sort of take the different versions and say, these don't mesh. What's the most logical way for it to happen? His trip to Constantinople, where he first became Christian curious when he was in Constantinople, where it occurs in the saga, is much later than where I have it. They have him coming back from Ireland late in his life and going the whole way back to Constantinople. And I give the reasons why they might have done that, but it made absolutely no sense. I took it from the time that he was closest there in his life and had good reason to go down to Constantinople because it was a short way, and he went with a lot of the Vikings who wanted to sign up as mercenaries. He didn't do that, but that was the most logical time for him to be in Constantinople, and I explain all that in the book. But that's the toughest part, is just getting all those different accounts to mesh together and try to make some sort of logical, chronological sense out of them.
You also use records as well, don't you? Did I remember that correctly?
Yeah, I think Harold Hardrada shows up from The Last Viking. He shows up in the Byzantine records a lot more because he spent much more time there. Olaf basically went down, visited, and came back because he had already achieved prominence. He was basically the head man for the Grand Prince in Novgorod, so he really didn't have any. He was already a high up fighting man. He didn't necessarily need to go to Byzantium. And Harold was already nominally Christian when he went, whereas Olaf was not. So he, like I say, became Christian curious, but he didn't stay.
What do you hope the average reader takes away from your Viking trilogy? I'm going to hold up all of them. But,
What runs through my Viking trilogy is really about the second Viking Age. I'm not really talking about that first period from Lindisfarne to Eric Bloodaxe. That's all sort of background. But you really see I think there's a civilizing effect going both ways because of the Viking pressure in the first Viking Age put pressure on all those kingdoms down in the south to consolidate and make themselves more defensible against this Viking challenge, the Viking invasions that were coming down. So I think that you see that barbarian influence, that pressure, making the southern kingdoms and empires raise their game and repel those Vikings. And then conversely, the fact that they did repel the Vikings, that sort of, as we discussed earlier, made the Vikings raise their game, and their kings started erecting bigger kingdoms up in their area as well. The Viking Age is where you see Europe coming out of the Dark Ages, and a lot of that is a lot of that is due to their influence, putting pressure and counter pressure, making kingdoms arise from where there was nothing before.
and I know that some people may not like the term Dark Ages, but how do you define the Dark Ages?
Well, I go from yeah, I know that's a politically incorrect term these days, but I'm old school. That's what I was taught back in the
That's
day,
fine.
and I
That's
never
fine. I
lost
know
it.
it's gonna come up. It's just, let's just if you don't
Well,
mind.
from the fall of Rome, the city fell in the west. Rome fell in 410. The Western Empire fell in 476. And that's where you see a lot of the Western Roman Empire falling into, disarray. You have the barbarian tribes that a lot of them had served as mercenaries in the Roman armies. You see them founding their own little kingdoms and everything. And it's not until you see, as we talked about, Charlemagne making the Holy Roman Empire, resurrecting the old Roman Empire, the old Western Roman Empire, that's sort of where they start coming back out of it again. So it's dark in terms of violence and anarchy, and it took several hundred years before Western civilization started dragging itself back up out of that pit.
You have like the Carolingian Renaissance, where
Right.
Charlemagne is like having all of these monks write stuff.
Right, exactly.
And so, okay, so that's what we're talking about, everyone.
Don't flame me. Don't come to my site and flame me.
What's the term that gets? It's like proto-historic time period. So
There you
have,
go.
it's like there's some written records being kept, but like not a whole.
But now, come on. Dark Ages sounds so much better than proto-historic.
It just like I learned that term recently and how it applied to this time period, like the early medieval age, the early Middle Ages. So not a lot of authors historians like to work in this period because probably because it's hard to research.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah. Few written sources.
Very few, and it's like you got B, and that's all.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Good luck.
Yeah.
So, how much do you trust him? But that's the end of my questions. I'm enjoying chatting about this, but do you have any other do you have any upcoming projects? Where can people find you?
Well, they can find free chapters of that book at hammerofthegods.co. .com was already taken. I think it's like a Led Zeppelin cover band or something. Oh. So my book is at hammerofthegods.co.
Okay. .co. Okay.
.co. Right. And I am about 3/4 of the way through my next book, but it's not related to the Viking Age, and I'd rather not say too much more about it so that somebody doesn't go to Chat GPT and say, give me 100,000 words on that subject and have it in Amazon by tomorrow. So,
are your books like 100,000 words?
Oh, Battle for the Island Kingdom, I think, is 120, and I cut that down.
This one?
Yeah, I think it's 120 because I started out, I think it was at like 150, 160, and the publisher was just like, no, gotta cut that down. And this next one that I'm working on, my agent said, give them 100,000 words, and I'm like, 100,000? That's not a book. That's like a pamphlet or something. And we talked to the publisher, and they said 120, 125, that'll be okay. Well, I'm 3/4 of the way into it, and 120 is already in the rearview mirror. I'm probably going to come in at like 160, maybe, I'm guessing. So a lot of cutting to be done after this.
Okay, wow.
Well, that's just the way I work. I mean, that's like, oh, that's cool, I'm going to put that in, and that's cool, I'm going to put that in, and then it all gets cut. It all gets cut.
It's like trying to be concise, but it's all cool information.
Well, a lot of it is I don't know what's going to be cool until I get to the end of the book. You put the stuff in, and you don't know if it's going to matter in the long term. You think that it does, but when you get to the end, you look back, oh, that didn't matter at all, and you take that out.
I remember you talking about cutting the snake fight in this book.
That wasn't for length. That was just because it was so over the top that my publisher just said, nobody's going to buy this, and let's not waste our time on it.
So it's like for our audience, there's a legend about Harold Hardrada fighting a giant snake in Byzantine prison.
Right.
So,
Yep, straight out of Sword and Sorcery. I mean, it's like maybe the first Sword and Sorcery. You have to look at these sagas. In some ways, you have to look at them like that. I mean, there's in the Hammer of the Gods, as I said, Olaf, there's scenes where Olaf is talking to Thor and he's talking to Odin. Odin shows up at a feast and tells him about the old times, the people who lived there and everything, relates the stories. And it's, like I say, it has to go in the book. I mean, that's part of the story, and you have to put that in there. And it's absolutely fine for readers to go, that's total BS, but it's part of the legend. You can't cut it out.
I do appreciate you keeping that. That makes it more exciting. I always feel like I should have more questions for you because we go through them so fast. I had one extra question. Can you remind me, your website is donhollway.com, correct?
Donhollway.com.
Donhollway.com.
HOLLWAY.com. Not Holloway, Hallway.
I'll be sure to put a link to your website in the description.
Thank you.
So, website and hammerofthegods.co.
Right.
Donhollway.com and hammerofthegods.co.
Right.
Well, thank you so much. And
thanks for having me back again. I dread coming to these interviews, but when I'm here, I always have a good time. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, I'm glad.
Yeah.
Well, I really enjoy talking to you. It's very
good.
fun.
Appreciate it.